Zachy the Sun is your host on this most epic journey through pop culture's past. Hold on to your butts. This is Nostalgia Theater.
Brought to you by the Movie Film Podcast.
I keep a close watch on this heart of mine. I keep my eyes wide open all the time. I keep the ends out for the tie that binds. Because you're mine, I walk the line.
Hi everybody, welcome back to the show. This is Zachy, and I've got a fun one here to share with you. This is my conversation with writer-director James Mangold. Now, we had this conversation last fall in the lead-up to the release of his Oscar-nominated film Ford vs. Ferrari, and we met in the restaurant at the Lowe's Regency Theater in downtown San Francisco. So that's what accounts to sort of the acoustics. We chatted over breakfast, and we talked about Ford vs. Ferrari. That certainly was the lead-into our conversation. Well, to be fair, the lead-into our conversation was him admiring my portable microphone that I was using to start our discussion, which I think really gives you an insight into the kind of filmmaker he is. He has a real eye for not only storytelling quality, but the technical end and what we use to get our stories told. And I think that was such a perfect way to get into it as we started talking about the film, which had not yet even been released, much less been nominated for Best Picture, so there is that. But from there, we were off to the races. We talked about what happened in the making of Walk the Line, his biopic of Johnny Cash. We also talked, of course, about Logan, the film that really elevated itself immediately upon its release a couple years ago into the upper echelons of comic book adaptations. And he has a lot of interesting insights into not only what made that film work, but also why Martin Scorsese may have sort of written off an entire segment of film by calling superhero films theme park rides. He has some thoughts on those, and I think they are compelling and interesting. Now, an edited version of this did appear in print in the Chronicle, but I really wanted to share the entirety of our discussion, and so I'm glad I have that available for you to listen to right now. So, without any further ado, here from last fall is my chat with James Mangold, again in the restaurant of the Lowe's Regency.
That's cool. Little extent condenser mic. It is amazing. It gets good results.
It's great.
Is it equal on both sides?
Well, you can set it up what kind of pickup pattern you want. So this is a stereo right now.
Who makes them?
This is Shure.
Sure. Oh, my actual mic company.
Yeah. A couple of years ago, I interviewed Steve Wozniak, and I got to bust this out, and he was like, "Wow, that's so cool." And I was like, "I just impressed Steve Wozniak."
Yeah.
That's a cool thing.
That's a cool moment.
So I just want to start out by telling you I brought my kid with me yesterday.
Oh, how old?
He is 12.
Oh, just like I have a 12-year-old son. And
Okay.
Did he like it?
So the movie and the lights come up, he turns to me, "That was awesome." He like whispers, and he's never said that to me about a movie.
Wow.
I'm not making that up. So
Well, it's interesting. I took my son to see Ad Astra, which is a film by a friend of mine, and I was thinking he was going to be. He had a similar reaction.
Okay.
I was thinking, this is going to be a little too grown up for him, or like the talky parts are going to be.
Yeah.
And he was absolutely riveted. And I think there's just suddenly a moment where kids want something more. Too, not just us.
Yeah.
You know, that they too recognize sometimes that what they're watching is a little.
Yeah, it's and
flat.
because I took him with me to Ad Astra, and they had the trailer for Ford vs. Ferrari.
He didn't respond to that one. Yeah.
Well, isn't
Different.
Right. I think my kid my oldest is a little bit more advanced when it comes to films too.
Right.
So he was talking through stuff about Ad Astra that I was like, oh wow, okay, you're picking up on stuff that I didn't realize, So and I love the symmetry of both of these are films about fathers and sons to
That's
some
true.
extent.
That is
through,
true.
Through the perspectives, one is through the son and one is through the father. With this, it took like less than 10 minutes for me to be 100% on board.
That's fantastic.
And I'll tell you where it was. It's the first race with.
I know. After Ford's speech, you get to the race. Well, after.
Way before that, it's.
That's in the first 30 seconds. The race where Matt's racing.
No, where Christian.
Oh yeah.
Is right after the fight, and I'll tell you when. It's when Matt is like, not yet.
Not yet now. Yeah.
And they have this telepathy.
Yeah.
And I was like,
I'm in.
everything. I love the relationship already. I don't even need to know the backstory.
Their past, yes.
And so I wanted to start there.
Yeah.
How do you decide how much and how little of the character's backstory to lay in before you just dive in?
It's a really interesting question, and one where movies are all about really shorthand in a sense, that you're sketching something, and to get the drama and exposition is exposition, which is the term for delivering information basically. Exposition is tricky because it's really hard to deliver a dose over a certain level without stopping the scene. Or the dramatic forward motion of the scene. Conflict doesn't exist. People usually aren't explaining their pasts or in any detail in conflict, so that you have to be very careful about that. My more artistic answer is that I think people need less than you think. I think that actors need to know who they're playing. But if you're working with great actors, they can communicate so much about where they come from without words, in behavior, in the way they relate to one another, and that the way when my mind is working when I'm staging a scene, my goal is I always ask myself, if I walked in on reality, would this feel like that? Does it? I mean, obviously, I have to play with certain heightened aspects or shaping, and therefore, when I walk in on things, if I walk into this restaurant and there's a family talking, there's no moment where the dad's going, well, Johnny, since we've been on this trip only 6 days and your mother's dead and I've remarried, we have to eat this way. It doesn't happen that way. You are left to watch the scene and go, where is the mother? Who is this woman here who isn't their mother? Yeah. And that the audience leans in to piecing together elements that then, what I try and do more often is retroactively confirm or deny what you started to put together. Okay. So that you save the audience the pain of being delivered information first, which is the equivalent of, when you get on an airline and they're telling you about the safety exits. Yeah. How many people are paying attention? Whereas if the plane were plummeting, everyone would want to know. So that exposition is not dissimilar in the sense that try and give them the information when they need it, or when its active presence helps them jump a new level in the story. But also give your actors the ability to communicate who they are and what they come from in manner. Yeah. I think Christian's character comes from working class roots. Shelby comes from Texas. No one says it. These are all things you can kind of figure out. You can see the presence of a kind of the idea that he might have been in the military in the past in Christian without necessarily someone saying it up front. And they say it later. You put it together. It connects dots you might have had. Yeah. It really comes from the desire to entertain and enthrall and hold you and take you to something deeper than information. Yeah. And I think the really most dangerous thing is when you make true life movies that are based on facts, based on real existence, real stories. There's a tendency to try and validate and hit these kind of factoids. Like if you notice in Ford v Ferrari, I didn't even put any little cards at the bottom of the screen that tell you what year it is or where you are, which has become almost a staple of this genre. And I always find them annoying because if the movie was a fiction film, we wouldn't be doing that. You wouldn't be and it's, to me, I've noticed that for a lot of directors, it seems to me a kind of trick, or a kind of, if the movie's flagging a little in tempo, one way to tickle the audience is just like little text on the screen that kind of gives you this injection of important feeling information. But I'm always like, if you're at a train station in Shanghai, can't you conclude that by looking at the Chinese flag flying, the Chinese people in the train station, this fact that the train stations or the train itself says Shanghai, the fact that because very often they'll even put that stuff on scenes where it's all visible for the audience.
Right.
I had an experience on another movie. It was the Wolverine I made that took place in Japan, where at the very beginning of the movie, the camera moves past the Japanese flag and comes down to a Japanese prison camp, and you see Japanese architecture, Japanese soldiers wearing Japanese World War II outfits. And I had one studio boss say to me, "Where am I? Where am I?" And what he meant was, where is the little dig-a-dig-a-dig-a-dig that tells me where I am at the bottom of the screen? And
I'm going to call it that now forever.
The dig-a-dig-a-dig. Well, because they do this teletype sound when they do them. There's this almost kind of action movie staple now. And but for me, I do have this kind of, call it purist, call it fundamentalist, but it's like the images and the actors should be able to tell the story without me handing you a libretto or telling you things that you don't need. Go to Google if you want to know when this race was. But I don't want you distracted by dates. Because it actually is, at least speaking from the point of view of a maker, these dates are a way to distract you when the movie's failing. They are generally, to me, a way to kind of go, this really happened. So if this scene isn't really working for you, I'm just reminding you that this shit really went down like this. And it kind of gives you this gravity, even if you don't deserve it. At least that's how I view them.
Well, just picking up on what you just said, I would love for you to expound on the decisions that you have to make as a filmmaker between, and obviously the goal is always for historical accuracy, what have you, but what happens when you have to make a choice between a historical quality versus a storytelling quality?
I think generally storytelling wins as long as it does not change the course of events or the tone of events, meaning that the thing I feel my medium is most able to communicate to you, unlike a documentary, unlike a book, is a feeling and a vibe for the place and the time. And that sometimes when you're presented with how, this meeting was actually a series of 3 meetings. One that took place in Detroit and one that took place here, and in between they had a trip to London. And, I can't either afford the audience's time nor the money or the cutting time of kind of all these turning something that's essentially simple into a kind of sequence just because it really happened that way. And so you're left with, am I betraying some reality by showing the way the decision to do X or Y happened, by not showing that it happened over a series of 3 meetings or rather in one? I'm making something up. I mean, I can give you a better example. Enzo Ferrari never went, according to many historians, to Le Mans.
Oh, wow.
He would only, they say. So that I was faced with this choice of the third act of the movie. Would I cut away to Enzo on a phone or listening to a radio, or would I have him at the race? And I made a decision to put him at the race. I did this because I felt that the fact, which, first of all, I'm not even sure everyone knows. I mean, Enzo did a lot of shit people don't know. He could have shown up at that race and just kind of stayed behind in the shadows, or come not dressed like Enzo, because the idea to me of mounting a team and sending it to Le Mans every year and supposedly having never gone, but that I've also, because I've done these movies before, I found that there's also, I mean, I'm wandering, but I'd say it's storytelling, but you don't want to be I don't want ever someone to get a wrong idea of history, meaning what they come away from the movie with would be incorrect. I wouldn't want that. Did Leo Beebe make every decision, difficult or hard decision, on our leads that we show in the movie? No. Did he make the most central ones? Yes. Meaning, was he the one who asked for Christian to slow down at the end? Yes. Meaning, was he their overseer and tangled with them? Yes. Were there other people who tangled with him? Yes. So for the sake of clarity, should I have had 3 different characters tangling with them and that you'd have to learn the names of, and 3 different actors to play all these different movements? Or was it easier to move it into one? It was easier to move it into one, particularly because that one, at the climax of the movie, ends up pushing an agenda that I wouldn't call evil, but I would call it oppositional to what the audience wants and what the heroes are after, and corporate versus idealist, and kind of finances and publicity over idealism and the purity of sports. And that another example I was talking about with Enzo, and I really wanted him physically there because it's a movie, and that cutting away to him seemed like it would undo an ability to do an obligatory thing.
Cutting away, like he's off.
Well, it would just it means that he can't make eye contact with or have any interaction with what is going on. He's just listening to a disembodied voice, and I used that effect on Christian Bale when he was left behind because of the very reason that I felt it would emphasize his distance and the torture of having to be so far away from his friends at that moment and listening to them through a kind of cocktail straw of the radio. And but I learned something making Walk the Line, which was that, we had licensed every autobiography by John and June Carter, John Cash and June Carter. We had the cooperation of the family and all their stories. And when I was working on the film, it was clear to me that I was struggling writing June and John's romance over the period that they were touring together. And part of it was because John and June, who were my sources, I was meeting with them on the movie, insisted, as did their books, that they never had any romantic interaction or touched each other while they were married to other people. Now, albeit these are books with forewords written by Billy Graham. These are books where you would not be necessarily divulging these things. But this was something they maintained and had maintained, whether they were doing Larry King interviews and Barbara Walters interviews and whatever it were. And at a certain point, Johnny called me from the green room, actually, of the Larry King show and said, "It's not romantic enough." And I go, "I agree." I go, "But you got to give me something." And I said, and he said, "What do you mean?" I go, "You two aren't telling me about your romance because there is some kind of shame involved and I can't build anything out of nothing."
Wow.
And they invited me back to Tennessee, and I came back, and they had made a solemn decision to tell me that once in Vegas, this thing happened.
Wow.
And up to that point, John, even because in previous conversation, well, I rubbed her shoulders once, and it was like, I don't think it's enough, dude. And it was all I needed because it even then correlated with a tailspin he went into after they kind of got together and then realized, when we're married to other people, this can't be. Wow. And then things unwound. And that what was so interesting, and where I'm getting to is in terms of reality, is that one of the weird deep dives you take when you dramatize a life is that all these actors have to inhabit these characters, is you also discover where history's lying. Where by having to put these stories up on their feet, you also discover where it's one thing to describe when something happened and how something in a book, but it's another thing when people have to act it out and you're all going, that doesn't make any sense. Why would someone have said that after that happened? And you're suddenly dealing with the emotional disconnect from narratives that are carefully constructed by the people who live through them to either make themselves heroes, hide things they don't want people to know, or position themselves at the center of events that they may not have been at the center of. Right. And so there's a myriad of ways that history gets murky, and that you have this odd drama itself, and rehearsing with actors is an odd blade where you cut through all that, and you kind of suddenly go, how did that work? Because I don't believe, even now that we're enacting what they said happened, I don't believe it. And I've got some of the world's greatest actors here, and we can't make these movements make any sense. And usually there's something missing. You're missing information, you're missing something. So sometimes the movie actually even gets, whether it's a factual truth or a greater emotional truth, I think you get there. And you have to kind of navigate your own way. But the other thing I try and do is pretend to myself that I'm not making the definitive story of anything. I can't be. I'm making Jim Mangold's version of this historical moment.
It's a one facet of the prism.
There's been many movies about D-Day.
Right.
If there was only one, it would put an undue burden on that one film.
Yeah.
That it's not. I'm not writing a book. I'm making a dramatic piece of art that is based upon real events, as opposed to carrying necessarily a greater journalistic burden, in which the first tier priority has to be accuracy.
Jim Cameron talked about this is during the Titanic. He says history is hallucination by consensus. And
that's a very extreme way of saying what I probably, and short and concise way of saying. It is. There's a lot of delusions that get carried forward, and a lot of elisions and connections that get made, and but the way we connect it all together, meaning that the bumps and grinds that Ken Miles had with Ford, which are documented, and then the personality we saw. We discovered how he would talk to himself when he was driving. So this is something that obviously no one has footage of that, so Christian made come to life. But it brings to life a kind of eccentricity where you then can kind of understand how this guy isn't cut from the kind of silent hero cloth that Ford might be craving. And that, so you begin to make new connections, new understandings of what could be kind of getting on people's nerves about each other. And that in and of itself leads sometimes to kind of, I don't know what to call them, but they're kind of greater truths that about these characters and how they, the simple equation that is laid out quite like origami in the movie is how much these characters were interdependent upon each other. And it's what I was drawn to initially, which is this idea that you have a car maker in Henry Ford II, who is a legacy, and by definition, a legacy, a guy who inherits a company, is going to have some serious self-esteem issues and issues of do I deserve this? Am I worthy?
He's not respected by
He's
people.
respected. He is respected, but I think it's still he's only there because of who his grandfather was.
I noted he's referred to as Deuce.
Because he's the second Henry
Right,
Ford, yes.
But there's a dual meaning there. Where
Right.
It's like drop a deuce.
Right.
And that stuck out to me. Like there's a little bit.
The Deuce, they call him. But let me. So you've got a guy who is a legacy, who didn't create the world he's running, who is making middle class cars, affordable cars for the working man, and then you've got Enzo, who is an aristocrat. Who created his company, self-made man, a visionary, who is building ridiculously great cars that no one can afford, literally made for no man but Enzo.
Right.
And that, and one man has this shining legacy as a visionary, building essentially automotive artwork, and one man has a legacy of running or maintaining a company that makes cars that are not as memorable, but are, in a sense, a part of our world, functioning and affordable. And each craves what the other has. Enzo's about to go bankrupt, and Ford needs cool. He realizes as a brand, he's starting to fall behind because he's starting to look like a tired brand. He needs a refresher. Now you jump down, and Enzo uses Ford and then abuses him and throws him, meaning gets his financing elsewhere, and now Ford is humiliated. And he reaches to two new characters. You take Carroll Shelby and Ken Miles. Carroll Shelby is a race car driver who was champion at Le Mans for Aston Martin and has a heart condition, and finds out he has a heart condition and can no longer race in 1959. Who is he more? What does that do to a man who is that good at what he does, who suddenly cannot get behind the wheel anymore? What does he do with that thirst for adrenaline? What does he do with that desire for the thrills behind the wheel and the sense of accomplishment? He channels all that obsession into designing cars, running a business, being a salesman, a kind of huckster as he begins, repackaging cars, prettying them up, making them look a little more badass, and selling them to drag racers. But he wants to race again. So when Henry Ford reaches to him, he needs someone to put behind the wheel. Who's he going to get? The best driver he can find. but a guy who can't drive without Carol, meaning a guy who's so difficult politically, who is so awkward socially that he can't get himself hired. Ken Miles had come in back from the war fighting in World War II to the U.S. and was too old, really, for most racing teams already from the moment he got out of the war, but was the best. But he was also too difficult. But in a way, they were perfect for each other. The two had a perfect symbiotic relationship because Ken was willing to help him build that car and drive it, if Carol was willing to protect him and give him the opportunity no one else would. And so in each case, you have these characters who, if they were fictional, couldn't be better drawn to have these It's just...
They're like a yin-yang.
Yes. And so that's where you start to yield all these really interesting connections, and that, Enzo has more in common, really, with personality type with Ken Miles. And Carol, in a weird way, has a kind of personality type that matches Henry Ford's, that there's a kind of, and there's all these different ways that they interconnect. I also found Iacocca, one of the reasons John Bernthal was so right for that,
and he's so good.
He's so good, is that I never realized, and no one ever discusses this, but everyone at Ford was a Ivy League educated blue blood of one type or another. And then you have this one guy who was there, who was from Allentown, Pennsylvania, from immigrant parents. And how he got there, who knows? I mean, it's hard scrabble, great work, a really great mind. But he couldn't have felt comfortable there. And that's not something I've read about or written about. It was just something I looked at Lee Iacocca from Allentown, Pennsylvania, and pictures of all these other execs, and thought, he does not belong there.
Wow.
He is an odd man out. And it's like, again, this is this weird way where, is history saying this, or it's just obvious the second you start putting this together that something he must have felt there. And then made it seem interesting to me that he also was the most sympathetic to Carol and Ken at many instances in the working together of Ford, but also that he was the one who ended up leaving the company to do something on his own, because he could never in the end get the respect of his boss.
Right.
He needed to have the kind of agency he wanted.
So as we wrap things up, I was wondering if I could ask you a question about Logan.
Sure.
Which, the Joker is out right now, and obviously great reviews, great reaction. But what's interesting to me is the conversation it's up there with The Dark Knight and Logan. And this movie's 2 years old, and it's already considered the upper echelon of comic book-based films, which I would imagine that's a pretty good feeling.
Sure.
What do you think the legacy of that film is in terms of this genre? I mean, yesterday you were talking...
Well, I don't think comic book movies are a genre. That's my own little...
the frame.
The whatever.
It's a medium, not a...
Whatever. No, but whatever it is, that I'm really happy that the movie is living on, and that the movie has a resonance. I think that it was made and born out of both mine and Hugh Jackman's impatience with what we felt were the kind of largely predictable and fairly worn out movements of fantasy films that, introduce British actor of the moment in a new outfit playing villain from a planet far away.
Would you say English character actor?
Yes, in an outfit that has to be designed in a way that it looks like no other outfit in the existing films, who has arrived to either A, destroy the Earth, destroy the universe, destroy our heroes. There is only one way to stop him, and that requires our heroes to, two of which have not been getting along, to blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's like you could just, for me, the idea of taking the context of a movie about, quote, superheroes, which is essentially, you could say, is a movie about Greek gods or gods, Jesus Christ films, Bible stories. The Ten Commandments is a superhero movie. By that, Hercules is a superhero movie.
And the way people talk about these, it might as well be religion.
Yes. Yes. I mean, there's a level of even greater commitment among some of the audience than you'd find and certainly about breaking canon and stuff like that. And my feeling was, well, what if we did? What if we made a more humanist story, one where the priority wasn't on special effects per se, or set piece sequences, or fulfilling a kind of structure that you're familiar with, but exactly the opposite, which is what would it be like if these people were real? If they really were walking among us? What is it like to live for 300 years almost? What is it like? What is the pain of that? What is it like to have this gear built into your body? It must fucking hurt. What is it like? It essentially, I asked myself, instead of me trying to make a Marvel movie, which I did somewhat in Wolverine, what happens if I can or could bend the will of one of these movies to make my movie? And as I had with Walk the Line or Heavy or 310 to Yuma, meaning just make my film and not be somehow handcuffed or trying to dance into a certain beat because of the quote-unquote genre or context of this story. Because I think that's where we've been missing out in that world of movies. We've been missing out because directors are very often so tied to working something into a universe that they don't have the chance to assert any ideas into the film itself other than, I mean, effectively it's like directing episode 6 or 7 of a TV series, where all the cast and the aesthetic decisions and the world and the tone of the world have been set in place. And you're just here to decide, am I going to cover this in overs or a moving shot from over here?
Right.
But you're not, the real job of a director, which isn't just shots, which is kind of, what is the tone and feel of this thing? What is the kind of thematic weight of this film?
And was there pushback when you're like,
no, we were clear. We weren't even going to make Logan if we couldn't do it on our terms.
Okay.
And luckily, I think in this case, we were making it for Fox, and so we didn't have the same allegiance to a larger universe, only the X-Men universe. And I was really clear, I didn't give a hoot about trying to kind of tie everything up for the other movies. In fact, I felt that it's what's been handicapping the ability of some of the films to be more wonderful. And that the bottom line thing I'd say, nor did the comic book artists and writers when they wrote them. Meaning that the part that's so frustrating to me with the audience is that every one of these heroes in comic book lore have had 6 or 7 restarts.
Right.
Their uniforms, their costumes, their layers, their histories, their whole backstories have been rewritten enough. Where do we get this golden age, platinum age hooey anyway? It's because people said, enough with this, I need to press reset. I can't be creative with all these pre-existing, with all the baggage. There's no way for me to even find the room to write an interesting story. So I want to do a new Flash that starts here instead of there. And there isn't a single well-known hero that hasn't happened to. And that's because artists within the world of comic books said, I need a chance to express myself with this character as opposed to just maintain the brand, which is in and of itself not, and I think it gets to the heart of what Marty was talking about.
Yes, which people have opinions on.
Yeah, but I think that if Marty was, if I took it as anything, I think it's when he describes something as a theme park ride, I think it's about brand maintenance versus storytelling. I would never argue that you can't make cinema. You can make cinema about anything. Marty would be the first one. He has a million B movies he loves that could be construed, quote, comic book movies. But the truth was, when they made them, they were focused more on cinema than on necessarily tie-ins with Happy Meals, action figures, etc., and connections to pre-existing and unmade movies yet to come.
Nice. I just want to say that I watched Copland. I just graduated from high school, and it blew my mind.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I've been a fan ever since then.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. That was the first major movie I wrote. I mean, other than Heavy, I actually wrote it before I made Heavy, and was told no one would ever buy it, so put it on a shelf.
Well, I'm glad someone did.
Yes.
Once again, big thanks to Mr. Mangold for taking the time to sit and chat with me, and I hope you enjoyed hearing what he had to say. If you have any questions or comments for me, please do not hesitate to send them my way. You can email us here at moviefilmpodcast@gmail.com. You can also hit like on our Facebook page, facebook.com/moviefilmpodcast. For any feedback, you can also, if the fancy strikes, go to iTunes and leave a review for the Nostalgia Theater Show, as well as the Movie Film Show that I host, of course, with Brian Hall. And if you're looking for me online, you can find me on Twitter at Zacky's Corner. That's ZAKIS Corner. That's also my website, justata.com. Thank you so much once again for listening, and I hope to catch you next time here on Nostalgia Theater. Thanks, everybody.